Hey everybody! It's Friday, May the 31st, 2024, and this is How to Restart a Church, a spin-off podcast where I, Pastor Trey Comstock, and my friend and colleague, Pastor Emily Larson, talk about how to make church happen and how to make church happen again. This week, we're going to talk about something that we talk about and around a lot, and that is the idea of essentially reusing your church space and turning it into something else other than a church. This kind of idea of creative reuse. And of course, as a lot of things on the show, it's driven in part by our, we should really get on. So I got to know some of the RNS reporters at General Conference. We should bring some of them on because Lord knows we use their stuff with some frequency. But a story that, I came across a while ago about, and this is like, in some ways, like becoming a really stock story. A church in Chicago, Lutheran church in Chicago, really big in the 1950s, decline, massive space, not a lot of people. What do you do? Great question. When someone has the answer to that, call me, because that's us too. They decided to essentially hand the building over to the YMCA. It gets fully transformed into a YMCA, and then the YMCA would have, because it is a Christian organization, although not a denominational organization, there would be a chapel at the Y that would be the home of the church, and the rest of the space would be workout, and the sanctuary becomes a gym, and then built into this is the way that a lot of churches have either started at the YMCA and then gone other places, right? It's a really common place for new church starts to meet, or even launched as a new church start and then never left because it turns out that as we've talked about before, it's really useful to be a place where people are naturally coming for reasons other than church. That's a thing I think about every day.
Yes.
And also, there was an interview in this article with folks from Church Health, this kind of hospital/health ministry in Memphis that instead of having their own rehab facility, opened up their space to a Y. I've actually been to that YMCA. Anyways, it's not really, the article's in the show notes. This is not a new idea, and this is an idea that we have seen in our, your and my research over 5 years of what do we do with churches. This is something that we have thought about and looked at a lot. We went to a place called The Mix out of White Rock United Methodist Church up in the Dallas area, where they had massive,
super groovy place.
Super cool, massively overbuilt for the size of congregation that they were, turned one of their whole buildings into a co-working space with artist studios and also a kitchen, the Mix Kitchen, where you could rent out the kitchen for your business that you can't afford your own commercial kitchen, but you need to make your whatever for either your home business or this thing you're trying to turn into your business. And then that is one where
your food truck or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this is one where the church has kept going and now has this whole other income stream from this turning a massive facility, which I will tell you can be a massive liability, and turning it into A, something that helps people, and B, helps the church too. So in the case for the Lutherans in Chicago, it is now they don't got to worry about this massive building, which I can tell you will kill you, will bleed the life out of you, will lead you
You
to...
speak from experience.
Yes. Good God. So that... and so instead of this being this liability for the church, turns it into an asset for the church and an asset for the community. Here locally in the Houston area, Spring Community Church, United Methodist congregation, a little north of downtown, but well within the size of New Jersey that is the city of Houston, actually up fairly near where I grew up, rents out a bulk of their facility to a charter school. And has had really interesting opportunities to build relationships with the students and the teachers. And it is this like really cool, they had too much space. Charter school needed a space. Charter school's not always the easiest thing to fund. Let's bring them all together. And we're going to get to it. That's actually how a lot of our space that we own goes too. And we're going to get there because if you notice in the title, this is, in parentheses, a cautionary tale. Because this is, like, the logic of this is powerful logic that we should lean into. We have these massive spaces that, especially when your congregation is too small for the space that someone built for you 2, 3, or 4 generations ago, in our case, it's 2 generations ago, like, this, what do? Right? We own 3 full-sized church facilities. Across our 3 locations, we own sanctuaries capable of accommodating 1,800 people. And we have been blessed in the past few years we are no longer a church of 20 people. We're a church of 120 people. And praise God. But still, we have a seating capacity, if it were all functional, which it certainly is not, of 1,800. And now, and this article brought it up, and this has come up as statistics we've had before, like the average church size was like 120 people in the early 2000s. Now here in the mid-2020s, it's like 60 to 70 people. And so we are bigger than the average church size. We are not a tiny congregation, but we are blessed with enough space for something, whatever that is, 10.5x our current size.
Right.
And I would love for the like glorious increase of, 1,600 more people, and maybe that'll come someday. I mean, shoot, we brought up Ed Young, Dr. Ed Young, on the last show. Bring him up again, right? When he took over that Second Baptist 46 years ago, it was 300 people. It's now 80,000. Yep. Anything's possible, but we've got to live that long. And so there is really, I want to talk about the cautionary side in a second, but I first want to lean into something that we talk about a lot of turning this thing that is an absolute nightmare to deal with, which is an excess of physical space. Turn this liability into an asset for you, the church, and an asset for the community. There are a lot of community organizations that would be doing a lot better if only they had space. If only they had space to call their own. And a lot of churches going, well, gosh, we've got all this space. It's killing us. What are we going to do, guys? And the answer is, if you can build the relationship right, you meld them together and
everybody wins.
Yes. Theoretically.
And everybody wins.
Right. And certainly for this, thing that feels largely written by the YMCA, it worked, right? Like the church gets what they really need. The Y gets what they really need. Some churches have had a really good experience never moving to have their own space at all, which I think is a really interesting. So I first got a pitch on that like a million years ago, like 9 years ago. And to my ears 9 years ago versus to my ears now, it hit really differently. Of like, what if you don't have to pay an air conditioning bill? What if you don't have to pay that? You always have to pay to insure your ministry, but what if you didn't have to pay to insure a building? I mean, there is, or at the very least, we shouldn't be hoarding the space that we have. We should make, as with anything, we should be making sure it's actually doing kingdom work, whether that is fulfilling the life of a local church, which is kingdom building work. But if that season for that space has gone away, shoot, there are a lot of people for whom achieving the ownership of real estate is just not plausible in this environment.
Right. Mm-hmm. So we did a little bit of this at Grace Church in Palestine, the People of the Second Chance. We had, because, gosh, we had so much land there. It was on a golf course. And so the church met in what was once, it was a lot of acreage. But we met in what was once the country club restaurant. Yeah. So that restaurant kitchen was, I mean, it was beautiful. Yeah, it was way too fancy for what our church needed. It was way more than what a potluck lunch needed for a church. We could do really, really fancy dinners there. But when looking at that kitchen and looking at the equipment in that kitchen and the freezer space in that kitchen, there was a walk-in freezer and a walk-in refrigerator.
Which made more than our youth director.
Yeah, that it cost a lot to run, which doesn't make sense for a church. But for the local food pantry that needed a place to store its excess vegetables so that they didn't go bad before they could be given to the community, that was a great asset that we could share. For the farmers market that wanted to reopen and do some more food vendors and licensing of food trucks that needed a commercial kitchen, that had a commercial kitchen license, that was very easy to go and get a nonprofit license for your commercial kitchen and then rent that space out to, lease that space to these new entrepreneurial spirits that were trying to get their business off the ground that couldn't afford a commercial kitchen. And so we built some really good partnerships with the community, and the church benefited from that too. I mean, our local bread baker made our communion bread. You know, there was a lot of good crossover there.
Or even just helped us be a better steward of our relationships in the community. I mean, the thing that we forget about with that church, because it was A, slightly before our time, and B, it was just the state of play, was the golf course too was one of those type arrangements, right? So the church didn't operate the golf course, doesn't operate the golf course. Right. The local school district does. And so that golf course had been allowed to lay fallow for several years, which is really bad for golf courses because they are so soaked in fertilizer that if you leave them fallow, it all goes bananas. And
it was crazy.
It was crazy. And so that church could never have afforded to claw back that golf course from nature, but the school district did. And so the school district operated as a public course. It had been a private country club. So now it was open to anybody with $20 and a set of golf clubs. And so it became an asset for the community. Theoretically, the school district, if that thing ever turned a profit, would make money off of it. They paid the church $1 a year. And if they ever made money, would pay us 10% of the profits. I say if they ever made money because we only ever received $1 a year. And it's because, I mean, the country club failed for a reason. But it was, even if it was no one was making money off of it, it at least was taking something that the church owned and making it available to the community. Certainly something that would have been a lot. We didn't have to maintain that golf course. Even if it was like blowing up into new nature, we didn't have to manage. We were not in a position to manage 116 acres. Lord knows we could barely manage the 5 acres that were our responsibility. And so it was it was one of these, and one that, other than the financial, really worked well. There was a good relationship between the school district and the church. Some of the leadership of the church were also leaderships in the school district. Small towns be like that sometimes. And we had that. And so we had that like good working relationship. And even though there was not a financial benefit, something that could have been a huge headache was instead, a headache for the church, was instead an asset to the community. And so it is, that is another, and again, that was a model that was in place before we got there, but it is one of those things that I don't really know why you buy a golf course when you're a church who is not going to operate a golf course. That's a different decision that we were also not involved in. But if you're going to own a golf course, it became this really cool community partnership that at least brought something that the church could help bring something to the Palestine community that was positive rather than hoarding 116 acres.
Yes. And just being that presence in the community. I worked for a church one time that before I got there, the original impression that the community had of the church is, oh, that's the old rich white church.
Yep.
That's a direct quote from somebody in the community when I was searching for a church. I was new to that city. Said, oh yes, we know that church. That's the old rich white church. Direct quote. And changing that script included the giving over of resources to the community from the church.
Yeah.
Resources that the church had that the community could use, and making those available so that you are no longer considered this silo over here of, oh, only the old rich white people go there. And so just being that presence, changing your reputation in the community has value as well.
Well, and it doesn't even have to be as drastic as some of the things we're talking about. When I was at Lexington United Methodist Church, we ended up not with an extra fellowship hall, but we built this like big family life center that was awesome. And had some really community-focused ideas to it. This was a church that hosted the activity after the football game, usually called Fifth Quarter. In a town of 1,100 people, this is a really common deal. And so the gym space was going to be for that. We had a massive after-school children's ministry. The gym was going to be useful for that. I don't think I'm supposed to call it a gym, but we're all going to deal with it. That's what it was. They did a lot of community meals as fundraisers, and so there's a much bigger kitchen to do for the feeding the children on Wednesday afternoons, because that was a major food insecurity thing. Food insecurity, big deal, big challenge. In a lot of communities, certainly in that one, every kid got a full meal when they came on Wednesdays. That also helped. So anyways, there's a lot of reasons to build this much bigger gathering space. It also became home to the contemporary service. It ended up being this really cool locus of community and growth for that church. But it was a huge financial investment. And this was a church that was doing all right, but it was a $750,000 building for a church for whom their annual budget was a couple $100,000 a year. That's a huge leap of faith. Yeah. Awesome. Paid dividends. God bless them. But paying for it, even in a church that was relatively healthy, as Lexington was, paying for it was a challenge. Around that same time, the local daycare ran out of space. Literally the only daycare. The only daycare in Lexington, Texas, my friend's house, ran out of space. Went to the owner. This is where my son went, but the owner went to her church, who it won't name. Hey, and that church that she went to had more space than we did. They turned her down. She came to us because we had built community relationships. Also, I was one of the parents. And when you're a pastor in a town of 1,100 people, everyone knows what you do, right? You have no anonymity. Yes. And
yes,
what Lexington ended up doing was renting out their fellowship hall, this kind of much older, smaller space, to allow that daycare to grow, specifically to launch an after-school program. And we built a new playground with the help of an Eagle Scout project to bring that up to daycare specifications. And that offset a huge amount of the money that was going into paying the debt on the Family Life Center. Awesome. The daycare is allowed to expand. Awesome. We've done something positive for that community, because God, when you only have one daycare in town, it needs to be able to function. And it didn't involve handing over the entirety of anything. In fact, on Sunday mornings, we were still able to use the fellowship hall for coffee hour. We were still able to use it for the Lions Club on Tuesday evenings. We were still able to use it for whatever. All the things we were going to use it for, we still could. It was only occupied during hours we didn't need it. And it became a real income stream that helped offset and make the Family Life Center activities building thing even more of an asset and even less of a boat anchor.
I like that you mentioned, so you've mentioned Lions Club, you've mentioned all sorts of things that can use your church space as community space. It really harkens back to the days of the Old West, when the church building was the center of town and it was the schoolhouse, and it was the government meeting building, and it was
I
the
literally
big
have
meeting space
pastored
for
one of those.
everything in town.
Blue United Methodist
Yes.
Church, same charge. Literally was that. It had been the one-room schoolhouse as well as the church,
Yes.
as well as absolutely.
Yes. But I hate seeing church parking lots empty throughout the week. I would much rather have a full church building 100% of the time, whether that be for your local Girl Scout troop or whatever, your AA groups, your NA groups, your your mixed use spaces, whatever it is that your church has that could be leveraged for your community to do good in your community. Open your doors, open your hearts to that, and see if that's a relationship that would work for you and your congregation.
Which transitions us very cleanly to the cautionary tale part of this. And it actually comes up in, I had it and then I lost it, of course it did. So it comes up in the YMCA article. This is Tim Hallman, who is the director of Christian emphasis for the YMCA of Greater Fort Wayne. One of the projects cited in there is in the Fort Wayne area. Says it requires trust and a close relationship between the congregation and the Y staff. When he talks to churches that want to partner with the Y long term, Hallman has one simple question, quote, "Do you love the Y?" End quote. He asks a similar question to Y leaders thinking of partnering with a church. If each group isn't committed to the other's success, sharing space won't work. And again, this is from the article, the RNS article linked, written by, we should probably cite the authors, Bob Smietana. Yeah, so let me tell you a story. Let me tell you who we are, right? So in 2007, our church wasn't church. It was 4 churches. It was Park Place United Methodist, Milby United Methodist, Garden Village United Methodist, and Epworth Parker United Methodist. None of those churches were doing great. All of them kind of fell into the trap of urban congregations that had been built for one urban demographic in the 50s and 60s, that as urban demographics changed in Southeast Houston, the churches did not change. And so there were these 4 massive, and one of them, Park Place, where we're based, truly massive church, and none of them were doing great. And so the idea, why we say Servants of Christ United Methodist Parish rather than church, is because we were built to be a collaborative parish where these 4 churches would come together. They would maintain ownership of the majority of the space. And a lot of the space that we own, the tens of thousands of square feet, would be utilized by other organizations. Some of them paying rent to us, some of them serving as an outgrowth of the ministry of the church. And so we still do, the Milby United Methodist became Mission Milby Community Development Corporation, which is still ongoing, and is an after-school program. It plays host to immigration lawyers. It plays host to an HISD program called a Sunrise Center, and that is 1.5 miles north of us, and is this community-focused ministry at the old Milby United Methodist Church. Epworth Parker United Methodist was sold. That sale completed a year ago and is the only reason our church's doors are still open. Park Place United Methodist became the main worshiping place for Servants of Christ. It's the largest building by far. It's this 1,200-seater mid-century modern thing that we talk about a lot because it's a challenge. And then Garden Village United Methodist became Mount Carmel Academy, a charter school that rents out the entire facility and pays rent to the church, which in full transparency is like a third of our income. We then also, here at Servants, here at the Park Place campus, at the time of the merger, had a major homelessness ministry that rented the activities building from us and ran a 2-day-a-week day shelter for homeless people. And then we, you and I, in our time here, have added a daycare that rents space here at the Park Place campus. So the state of play 15 years ago was Milby UMC became Mission Milby Community Development Corporation that then also brought in other nonprofits. There's like 5 nonprofits under its roof right now. Garden Villas was a charter school paying rent to us, and then a bulk of this facility was used by Crossroads Homelessness Ministry, which paid rent to us, and other nonprofits as well. Over time, a lot of that fell apart. So the relationship between the church and the homelessness ministry fell apart. And 3 or 4 years ago now, the homelessness ministry had to find a new home at the Episcopal Church up the road. The relationship with Mission Milby, to put it mildly, has been complex. And frankly, neither of the organizations, neither the church nor Mission Milby, are as healthy as they should be, because those relationships didn't get formed or weren't maintained in healthy ways. And we're really bad at the landlording business. The church was never able, as the church, we never made enough money, or a lot of it just continued to decline. And then our demographics radically shifted so that we were never able to invest in our facilities. And so, we are looking at, meeting with realtors and looking at like what properties that we currently own do we let go of, and how would that open up new ministry possibilities. And I think a lot of it, some of it is just, it didn't play out because the hopes and dreams of the church didn't play out. There was never a pipeline for growth until something really cool exploded in our midst. And so as the church continued to decline, the resources to maintain the parish continued to decline. And then, COVID and freezes and natural disasters, none of that helped with any of it. But I think over time, what we hear and what we see is that the alignment of the church and the organizations that were a part of it, that came into contact with it, just no longer aligned. The church and the homelessness ministry no longer aligned. The church and Mission Milby, in a real way, no longer aligned. And so there's a lot of tension and difficulty in those relationships. And some of that goes into how those relationships are structured, but a lot more of that goes with you've got to love the why. If you're going to be certainly a paid home of a twice-a-week homelessness ministry, you've got to really love what that means. Because it also means there will be a lot of unhoused folks around a lot. And that's that I'm not saying that as a threat. It's just the reality, right? Like if you were and there are there are sometimes side effects. Right. It's people living complicated and difficult lives who do not always have it together. And so they're just the beloved children of God, but they're the beloved children of God with a very specific set of challenges. Right. And that's going to be a part of the reality of your church. Especially if you're going to rent space, you've got to love that. That's got to be your thing. If you're going to be in a relationship with a community development corporation, you better be really clear what that's going to mean and what that's going to look like. And you got to feel like that is a mission of your church. And if that stops feeling that way, you no longer love the why. Right. And so that is we see the other side of this. Even as I am personally advocating, do this. Open up your space. It's rad. It's a good thing to do. But you need to be really, if you're going to do this, you need to be really clear that, a big part of your life now is you are home to a charter school. A big part of your life now is you are now a church that meets at a YMCA. And there's a lot of real benefit that comes from that. But you've got to align with the potential side effects of that too, or and have to and also because we don't, none of us were here in 2007. I was in undergrad, so were you. We were both in undergrad in 2007, right? So neither of us were here. I don't know what the alignment was like at the time, But I know that the alignment to that vision of church life, certainly if it was ever there, 15 years in, when we got here, we're not there anymore. And so,
Right.
like, you have to, A, be really clear that this is now going to be a huge aspect of our lives, and continue to do the
Yes.
work of maintaining the relationships with the YMCA, with the community development ministry, with the charter school, with whoever, to constantly renew that relationship. Or you're going to end up like why this podcast is called How to Restart a Church and not, boy, they restarted a church, is 15 years into that model, it had degraded to the point where that was, I think, an attempt to restart this church. We are now having to restart this church again. It's a restart, right? That they had done this radical thing grounded on some amazing principles, but just having a good idea, there is still how do you do it? You got to love the why, and you've got to stay in love with the why.
Yes. You have to stay in partnership with, and that comes from the relationship from the YMCA as well, right? Towards the church. The YMCA has to love the church as much as the church is loving the YMCA. That both organizations have to be on the lookout for the best outcome of health for the other. Just like any marriage, right? Both partners have to be in looking for the best outcome for both parties, or someone's losing, right? But
or
the benefits of it is everybody could win.
Everybody could win, or it could end up like, me and my freshman roommate, right? And it is, I think it is literally cohabitation. And so the challenges of cohabitation among individual humans are also the challenges of cohabitation among organizations. That when done well, it can be amazing, right? And when the relationship isn't maintained, when, I often in artwork talk about how good fences make good neighbors. When the fences are not maintained, when the boundaries, right?
Yes.
And I don't mean boundaries, I mean boundaries comma positive, right? Like in the way that millennials use boundaries, right? That we all need boundaries in a relationship. That's how you keep them healthy. When you don't have the healthy boundaries, whether put in place or maintained, and you don't, or or you've had that conflict doesn't get worked through, and now you are no longer friends, but you have this contract that says you are no longer friends, but you live together. Like, that's really difficult. Let me tell you, is really difficult to navigate. And and so, often this is a show of positivity, and I am really positive about the possibilities of better utilizing church space. But the church leadership side of that is it can't just be about the money you're going to get, because you are going to, there's potential to really, really get money. I mean, across all the organizations who make money off of our facilities, it's like $300,000 a year between what Milby makes, what Mission Milby makes off of renting out space at the Milby site, and what we make off of Garden Villas and the day school here. Like, it's, it's bumping up against 300, significant money. But we are not healthy enough as a church, right, that to invest in the properties in the way that a true property holding company would. And we haven't always, and I think you're right, it takes two to tango, but like the maintaining the relationship side, and the homelessness ministry is at the Episcopal Church up the road now. They're not here. They had been here for 20 years longer, and they're not here anymore. And that was like, if you walk through our activities building, it was like designed with this homelessness ministry in mind. and we're no longer home to this homelessness ministry. And there's a whole complicated set of factors as to why that happened. But in the end, it goes back to alignment and relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would love the 10 years in, how does Good Shepherd Lutheran Church feel about the why? And I suspect they've done the work, that it'll be good, that this will be this amazing thing. And it has a real potential to be an amazing thing, but it is not a easy panacea. And you've got to keep saying this because the article said it, and it describes my challenge in all this. You've got to love the why.
Gotta love the why.
Right? Like, Lexington UMC loved My Friend's House Day School. And that was really positive. And they fed into the children's ministry. And it was, it can be this, it really can be. And I think there was a season even here where it was this amazing thing. But you are inviting in roommates, right? Or becoming somebody else's roommate. Or you're becoming...
With all of the challenges therein.
Becoming a roommate in your own building. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, anyways, we've seen the wonderful of this. And there are absolutely... even Union Coffee, where we were a year ago.
Yes.
They are on a corner of another church's lot. And feed into ministries of that church, even as they're a separate thing. And that meant that they could be in a much more primo location, and also alter the structure of their costs. Again, this is a wonderful use of church space, as long as we can all stay in love with each other.
Yes.
If you have experienced this in your own church life, comma positive or comma cautionary, email us. thegoodnessofgodpod@gmail.com. That is thegoodnessofgodpod@gmail.com. And don't give up on the plan. Just understand understand from experience what's going to make this work. If you would like more of what we do around here in the Servants Now Media Lab, check us out, Servants Now, on the things, on the Facebooks, facebook.com/servantsnow, on the YouTubes, the youtube.com/servantsnow, on the internets, servantsnow.org. We're working on our Instagram presence. Should be rolling out relatively soon. We will let you know. We couldn't do this without the Generous Innovators Grant from the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. If you would like to help us, comment, subscribe, share, leave 5-star reviews on Apple Podcast. All of that helps our stuff go further and helps this be more sustainable. And go in peace to love and serve the Lord. We'll see you next time.